So just as a heads up, I've actually opened a slightly different version of this document that I've already done a lot of manipulation to. So it looks a little bit different. But I also want to note that if you're not paying attention when you're doing quick selections of things, gotta go back to Photoshop, and I zoom in, you can also see little things that happen like, whoops, I didn't get that and I deleted it and I need to go back to that hopefully original layer that I saved or duplicated. I did not. So you can see I opened this one because I wanted to show you when you have a bunch of different layers, what that starts to look like. It can start to get really cumbersome. Your files also can get really big. So other things that you can do is you can start to create folders and create organization systems when you have a lot of layers happening, and you can create groups. So you can just hold down Shift key and select multiple ones that are the same and drag them into a folder and then continue to do that. So you can see that it's indented, it's within that group. So then I can just turn those off specifically, and it starts to, I can rename that group and I can call it body shapes or something. I should be able to, yes, I double clicked it, body shapes, things like that. So it's important to kind of keep track of those. I think it is helpful to start naming your layers and keeping track of things like that. Another selection tool that I did not point out yet that is kind of a basic go-to for everybody. It has its pros and cons. It's a super quick and easy thing. But it is, in the case of this image here, if I try to use it, it's the magic wand over here. If I click that and I try to click this image, sometimes depending on how it is, I also just selected things because I have this layer highlighted. So you have to remember that when you're clicking on things, you have to actually have the layer on that you want to select. And if I click that, then it can be kind of fussy, and you can adjust the tolerance here. The more I increase it, the value here, the more it will grab of similar things. That's also the case if you remember to choose contiguous or not. So it's more, contiguous is like touching areas of the same value. If I unclick that and I click a value, then it'll select all of the similar values within there. So you might want to play around with that. But I find there's a couple other selection things that I may want to do aside from Magic Wand. So if I have this on and I want to Magic Wand is great if there's not a lot of weird nuances of values like that are happening here. But if I have defined shapes like this and I need to select that layer, but then if I really want those very easily defined shapes or layers, I can quickly and easily grab those. The other thing that I can do with that is to also be aware under select, there's also color range. This comes in handy in other situations if you have multiple colors in there and you want to select an actual color range, and you would adjust how hyper-specific you want it to be, but you can also select that range there, and you see there's a lot of marching ants in there, so if I adjust that the other direction, there we go, and hit OK, then it has that solid color area. So there's a lot of different ways to achieve one thing depending on what your needs are. In terms of other selections, what can be handy and what you can start doing to manipulate things. Let's say that I want this pattern, which right now I have as 33% opacity. Let's say I want this pattern over just one of the figure parts alone. I've gone through and I've done this already, and I've selected just this figure. And I have it just in blue to make it a solid shape so it's easier for me to select that part of the figure alone. And so I can select that. I can actually go in now and turn that off. And I don't want to mess up this layer, this pattern that I have as a whole. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to duplicate that layer. And I should name it. And I'm going to turn off this other one. And so I have this selection happening right here that's around just that figure. And And what I can do now is it's just around that figure. So now if I go to Command-Shift-I to select the inverse, and if I delete everything, then only that shape is only showing up in that part of the figure. So now if I reduce the opacity, then I have that pattern over the top of just that part of the figure. For the sake of just showing you a few more things with that, I can increase the opacity for right now. I'm going to scroll down and turn this off so that I can just see that. And then I can do other things with my brush, right? So I can go in, I've got this blue color selected, and I could just do normal brush mode. Oops, but remember I have the background selected. So I'm going to undo that, and I'm going to inverse my selection, and I'm going to be able to manipulate things that are just in that selection, as I mentioned before. Some other things that you can really play around with that might be handy or not is the different modes of brushes. You can play around with different things and what that does. I'm going to make my brush size a little bigger. What does it do if you do that? Something that I like to play around with to see how things look is overlay. And I can kind of see what that would look like in a cover overlay of that. But keep in mind I'm holding down my cursor, and if I hit it again, it's going to make it even more intense, right? But I'm going to go back up just so that you know some different things that you can do with that. And in doing that, I've actually already achieved this previously with something else, or already having done this. So I have a version of this that I've already done that is slightly different, but that's how I achieved that in that specific area. So I'm going to go back to that opacity. I'm going to turn that layer on. I'm going to deselect this, and I'm going to go down to my figure so that you can kind of see this is how I created a mock-up for a piece that I was making to know what it would look like if I applied this over the top. And last, if I am looking at my image size here, I don't know that this is the last thing, but if I'm looking at my image size here, we talked about image size here, going to that. I can mess around with this. I don't want to resample just yet, and I want to make this 300 dpi, and I'm fine with that size right now. That's fine, but I don't like how cramped it is to the edge. So another thing to be aware of is my canvas size. I can increase my canvas size and it does not change the size of this image right now, so that I would basically be giving myself more room. And you can also change what direction it adds space around it. So right now it's about 9.5 by 8.2. If I wanted it to be 11 inches wide and 8.5 inches tall, and I increase that all around, I would want to pay attention to, normally you can select this, you would want your canvas extension color to be white, or you can control what that is. I don't have that option right now, I believe, because my background layer is not turned on. So on and so forth. So this sort of checkered pattern indicates that that's invisible, and that's okay. But that's just a little bit of a quick tip to know about how to extend your canvas size.